To the world, my husband is Dr. Miles Corbin. He's the man on the cover of Mindful Partner magazine, smiling with that easy academic charm that has sold over 10 million books. The headline this month reads, "The Architect of the Modern Marriage." They call him a guru, a revolutionary, a man who cracked the code on human connection. His marriage to me, Dr. Gillian Corbin, is held up as the gold standard, a testament to his theories on communication, respect, and radical empathy. Our sprawling Austin home, with its clean lines and panoramic views of the hill country, is the stage for this perfect life. It has been featured in architectural digests as a physical extension of his philosophy, transparent, open, and built on a foundation of unshakable trust. But there are two kinds of truth in this house. There's the one we sell, and the one I live. In private, when the cameras are gone and the adoring fans are just pixels on a screen, my husband is a different kind of architect. He is a builder of prisons, not with steel and stone, but with words and silence. He is a master of psychological abuse, a virtuoso of coercive control. He wields his deep, intricate knowledge of the human mind, not as a tool for healing, but as a weapon of terrifying precision. For years, he has used his therapeutic acumen to gaslight me, to dismantle my confidence piece by piece, to make me believe that I am the problem. He has methodically convinced me that I am emotionally unstable, a fragile, beautiful thing that he, in his infinite compassion, must manage. The world sees a partnership. I live in a meticulously crafted psychological panopticon, where the warden is the man who kisses me goodnight, but the foundation of his perfect world has a crack in it. A crack that I created. For the past 374 days, I have been his most diligent student. I have been secretly recording our conversations. Every whispered criticism disguised as concern, every rewritten memory, every time he has turned my own feelings into a symptom of my supposed instability, and I haven't been listening to them alone. I have been sharing them with the one person on earth who understands his playbook better than I do, because she helped write the first draft before he stole it. Dr. Elena Vance, his biggest professional rival, the woman he publicly dismisses as a bitter academic and privately fears as a genuine threat. Elena is helping me deconstruct his every move. She's translating his poisoned love language, turning his methodology into a schematic for my escape. She is teaching me how to use his own work, his pillars of trust, his frameworks for vulnerability, against him. He thinks I'm still his devoted, fragile wife, lost in a fog of confusion he so expertly created. He has no idea that the fog has lifted. He has no idea that I am no longer the patient. I am the strategist, and I am about to use his own celebrated playbook to systematically dismantle his career, his reputation, and the entire beautiful lie of his life. He taught me everything I needed to know to be the perfect victim. He never imagined I'd use that education to orchestrate his downfall. It all came to a head at the annual publishing gala last spring. It was a glittering affair in a downtown Austin ballroom, the kind of event Miles lived for. He was the keynote speaker, celebrating the release of his fifth bestseller, The Empathy Equation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low hum of industry networking. I stood by his side, a perfect accessory in a deep blue dress he'd picked out. I smiled until my face ached, my own doctorate in clinical psychology feeling like a costume I was wearing, not a credential I had earned. He took the stage to thunderous applause. He was in his element, bathed in the warm glow of the spotlights. He began his speech, his voice a rich, confident baritone that could soothe a feral animal. He talked about his theories, his work, and then, as he always did, he turned the spotlight on me. He said, "Gillian, my brilliant, beautiful Gillian." He gestured to me, and 1,000 pairs of eyes followed his hand. I felt like a butterfly pinned to a board. He told the audience, this work would be impossible without her. She is my muse, my anchor, and my greatest case study in the power of patience and understanding. A soft, sympathetic awe rippled through the crowd, but then he continued. He told a story. He said, "You know, when I first met Jillian, she was a whirlwind of anxiety, brilliant of course, but so trapped in her own head. She'd overthink every little thing, creating these intricate emotional storms in a teacup. There was a time early on when she was convinced she'd left the stove on and made me drive 2 hours back home from a weekend trip. The stove, of course, was cold." The audience chuckled. A warm, knowing laugh. They weren't laughing at me. They were laughing with him at this charming, relatable anecdote of a loving husband dealing with his adorably neurotic wife. But the story wasn't true, not a single word of it. The stove incident never happened. It was a complete fabrication, a piece of fiction designed to do one thing: to reinforce the narrative he had so carefully constructed. The narrative of Miles, the patient savior, and Jillian, the brilliant but broken woman he so lovingly supports. In that moment, under the gaze of his entire professional world, he wasn't honoring me. He was neutering me. He was reducing my own professional accomplishments to a footnote in the story of his magnanimity. I saw it in the eyes of his publisher, who gave me a kind, pitying smile. I saw it in the face of his agent, who patted my arm and said, "You're a lucky woman, he's one of the good ones." The lie was so clean, so perfect, that it had become more real than the truth. I felt the blood drain from my face. For years he had done this in private, chipping away at my reality behind closed doors. I had become accustomed to the quiet horror of it. But this was different. This was public. He had taken one of his private little lies and polished it into a stage anecdote for 1,000 people. It wasn't just gaslighting anymore. It was performance art. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it hardened. The long, slow fever of my confusion finally broke, and what was left was a chilling, absolute clarity. It was the first time I saw the monster, not just the man, and I knew, with a certainty that vibrated in my bones, that just leaving him would never be enough. He would write the ending to that story, too. I had to write it myself. The drive home was a masterclass in his method. The silence in the car was thick and suffocating, a weapon he wielded with more skill than any shouted word. I stared out the passenger window, watching the city lights blur into streaks of neon and white, my mind replaying the pitying smiles, the knowing chuckles. I felt a cold, quiet rage solidifying in my chest. He finally broke the silence, his tone dripping with the manufactured concern he had perfected over the years. "Are you all right, my love? You've been so quiet since the speech. Did I say something wrong?" He placed a hand on my knee, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like a brand. I didn't answer. I just kept my eyes fixed on the world outside our rolling, leather-lined prison. He sighed, a sound of deep, theatrical disappointment. "Jillian, please talk to me. You know how I feel when you build these walls. It's what we've worked on. You're spiraling, aren't you? I can see it. You're misinterpreting my intentions again. Everything I set up there was from a place of love, of admiration. Can't you see that?" He was already laying the groundwork. I was spiraling. I was misinterpreting. My reaction wasn't a valid response to his public humiliation of me. It was a symptom of my inherent fragility. It was the same script, the same suffocating dance we'd been doing for a decade. But tonight, for the first time, I wasn't just a participant. I was an observer. I could see the strings. When we got home, I walked straight past him, up the floating oak staircase of our perfect house, and locked myself in the master bathroom. The room was all marble and glass, a cold, sterile sanctuary. I leaned against the door, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I finally let the tears come. They weren't hot tears of sadness. They were cold, silent tears of fury. I looked at my reflection in the vast, frameless mirror. The woman looking back at me was a stranger. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale. This was what he had made me, a ghost in my own life. My mind started to race backwards, tumbling through the years, collecting the evidence I had long dismissed. I remembered our first few months, the love bombing. He'd studied me like a subject, learning my insecurities, my dreams, my fears. He reflected them back to me, creating this perfect, intoxicating mirror of a man. He'd say things like, "I've never met anyone who feels things as deeply as you do. It's a superpower." He made my sensitivity sound like a gift, all the while learning how to use it as a weapon. Then came the first real red flag, so subtle I barely noticed it. I was up for a promotion at the university research lab where I worked. I was competing with a colleague, a man named David. I came home one night, stressed about a presentation. Miles sat me down, poured me a glass of wine, and gave me his full therapeutic attention. He said, "Jillian, your work is impeccable, but you lead with your heart too much. David is a politician. You need to play the game. Why don't you let me help you reframe your presentation?" He said reframe, but what he did was inject it with his own brand of pop psychology, diluting my hard data with his marketable jargon. I gave the presentation. It was a failure. My department head said I'd lost the thread of my own research. David got the promotion. When I came home, devastated, Miles held me and said, "I'm so sorry, my love. I guess your boss just isn't as enlightened as we are." He hadn't just sabotaged me, he had done it under the guise of helping, and then used the failure to reinforce the idea that the world was a harsh place, and he was my only safe harbor. He isolated me, one failure at a time. A more visceral memory surfaced. A fight, about 3 years into our marriage. It was over something trivial, a dinner party I'd forgotten to add to his calendar. He had said something cutting, something about my chronic disorganizations being a symptom of a deeper anxiety he was trying to help me manage. I had called him on it, my voice shaking. I told him, "You can't just diagnose me whenever I make a mistake." His face went cold. He looked at me with a chilling lack of emotion and said, "I have no idea what you're talking about. I would never say that to you. You must have imagined it. You've been under so much stress lately, Jillian. It's common for the mind to play tricks, to confabulate memories under duress." He used the word confabulate, a clinical term. He was using the language of my own profession to convince me I was losing my mind, and the most terrifying part. It worked. I had left that conversation apologizing to him, my own memory feeling like a faulty recording. I genuinely believed I had imagined it. The seed of my own instability planted by him had begun to sprout. And the money. Oh God, the money. It started with a joint account, a symbol of our partnership. Then he suggested he handle the investments since he was meeting with financial planners for his book empire anyway. It was an act of service, he'd said, to take that burden off my shoulders. I was busy with my research. It seemed logical. Over the years, my salary went into the joint account, and he gave me an allowance on a separate card. He called it our streamlining plan. I didn't realize until much later that I had no direct access to our main accounts. I had no idea where the money went. I had become a highly paid professional who was on an allowance from her husband, and I had let it happen because it was all wrapped in the language of care and protection. I slid down the cold bathroom door, the full weight of a decade of this subtle, insidious poison crushing me. He hadn't just lied to me. He had systematically dismantled my reality. Leaving wasn't enough. Divorcing him wasn't enough. He would control that narrative. He would tell the world his tragic story of loving a brilliant but unstable woman who eventually succumbed to her demons. He would write another best-selling book about it. He would profit from my pain. No, I couldn't let that happen. The rage in my chest cooled and hardened into something else. Resolve. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about reclaiming my truth. It was about taking back the story of my life. I wiped my tears and stood up, looking at my reflection again. The hollow-eyed woman was gone. In her place, I saw a flicker of the person I used to be, a determined, intelligent scientist. I had spent my career studying patterns of human behavior. It was time to apply my skills to the most important subject of my life. The next morning, I went through the motions. I made coffee. I listened to him talk about his schedule, his calls, his interviews. I was the perfect, attentive wife. But inside, I was a machine. While he was in the shower, I went to his office. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. I sat at his desk and typed Dr. Miles Corbin reviews into the search bar. Page after page of fawning praise, 5-star reviews, glowing testimonials. It felt hopeless. Then I refined my search. But Dr. Miles Corbin criticism. The results were sparse, buried under pages of SEO. His team had no doubt meticulously crafted. But on the fourth page I found it. A link to an obscure academic journal. The title of the article was The Corbin Method, Pop Psychology and the Erosion of Ethical Boundaries. And the author's name was Dr. Elena Vance. I clicked the link. The article was a scathing, brilliant, and surgically precise deconstruction of Miles's entire public philosophy. Elena didn't just criticize his work, she vivisected it. She pointed out how his theories on radical honesty could be easily weaponized by abusers to justify cruelty. She demonstrated how his pillars of trust were actually frameworks for establishing coercive control. She used the very same language Miles used, but she turned it inside out, exposing the rot at its core. She saw it. She saw exactly what he was. I read the entire 10,000-word article, my heart pounding with a feeling I hadn't felt in years: validation. I wasn't crazy. It was real. Someone else saw the monster. At the bottom of the article was a short bio. But Dr. Elena Vance is a practicing clinical psychologist and a former colleague of Dr. Corbin's at the University of Texas. A former colleague. A little thrill went through me. This wasn't just an academic rival. This was personal. I found her professional website. It was simple, no frills. Nothing like Miles's glossy, branded online empire. There was a contact form. For a moment I hesitated. Reaching out to her was a declaration of war. It was the first irreversible step into a new terrifying reality. I thought of his face on that stage, the pity in his publisher's eyes. I thought of the word confabulate. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The subject line was simple: a question about your article. The message was even simpler. Dr. Vance. I am Dr. Gillian Corbin. I believe you and I have a mutual interest. I have information that might be valuable to your research. I would like to meet with you, in person. As soon as possible. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The click of the mouse was the quietest sound in the house, but to me it was as loud as a gunshot. The old Gillian, the fragile, confused wife, had died on that bathroom floor last night. A new Gillian had just been born, and she was ready for a fight. The email reply from Elena Vance came less than an hour later. It was 3 words long: name the time. We agreed to meet at a nondescript coffee shop in a part of Austin I rarely visited, a place of worn wooden tables and the rich, earthy smell of roasting beans. It felt miles away from the sterile glass and steel world Miles had built for us. I sat in a corner booth, my back to the wall, a habit I'd developed without even realizing it. I ordered a black coffee, my hands wrapped around the warm ceramic mug, trying to still their slight tremor. Elena arrived exactly on time. She was the opposite of Miles in every way. Where he was tall, smooth and polished, she was shorter, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a cascade of unruly dark hair pulled back in a clip. She wore a practical blazer and jeans. No pretense, no performance. She looked at me, her expression unreadable, a mixture of professional curiosity and deep-seated suspicion. She slid into the booth opposite me and said, without any preamble, Dr. Corbin. This is unexpected. It's a textbook Darvo. Deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. He's denying your reality, attacking your emotional state by calling it spiraling, and reversing the roles by making your silence the problem, not his actions. It's flawless. That one word, flawless, sent a shiver down my spine. This was the beginning of my new education. This was the start of the plan. That first meeting turned into a series of clandestine sessions. We met twice a week, sometimes at her quiet, book-filled office, other times in anonymous hotel lobbies or public parks. I became a spy in my own home. I bought a new smartwatch with a high-fidelity voice recorder. I placed tiny digital audio recorders, the kind journalists use, in the rooms where he held his court, his office, the living room, even our bedroom. Every night, after he fell asleep, I would retrieve the data, downloading the day's abuse onto a triple encrypted hard drive that I kept in a safe deposit box on the other side of town. Each session with Elena was a revelation. She was my translator, my guide through the psychological maze he had built around me. I would play her the recordings, and she would deconstruct them with the precision of a bomb disposal expert. "This, Jillian, is a pattern interrupt," she explained one afternoon, after I played her a clip of me trying to discuss our finances. I had brought up a bank statement, and he had immediately changed the subject by bringing up a fond memory from our honeymoon, completely derailing my train of thought and making me feel petty for trying to bring it back to money. He disrupts any pattern of conversation that leads to his accountability. The only way to counter it is not to follow him down the rabbit hole. You must become a broken record. State your point. When he interrupts, you pause, and you state it again. Calmly, exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. Another session, we focused on his use of future pacing. I played a recording where he responded to my unhappiness by painting this vivid picture of our future retirement, of the house we'd build in Italy, of the grandchildren we'd have. He does this, Elena said, to make the present problem seem insignificant compared to the beautiful future you would be jeopardizing if you rock the boat. He's selling you a fantasy to keep you compliant in your current reality. The counter is to refuse to engage with the fantasy. When he talks about Italy, you bring him back to the Tuesday night he belittled you. You anchor him in the now. The most important lesson was learning to identify his gaslighting trinity: deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender. Elena had me create a spreadsheet. Columns for date, time, incident, his words, the technique used. I became a meticulous archivist of my own erasure. Filling in that spreadsheet every night became a ritual. It was painful, but it was also empowering. The abuse was no longer a confusing, emotional fog. It was data. It was evidence. It was quantifiable, analyzable, and therefore defeatable. During this time, I started paying more attention to his professional life, specifically to his relationship with his new protege. Leo was a young, brilliant, and deeply ambitious PhD candidate whom Miles had taken under his wing. He worshipped Miles. He quoted him in conversation. He dressed like him. He was a perfect 20-something echo of the man my husband pretended to be. I saw in Leo the same wide-eyed admiration I once had, and I saw Miles using the same techniques on him. He would praise Leo lavishly in public, then cut him down in private with a well-placed, "That's a good start, Leo, but you're still thinking like a student. Let me show you how to elevate it." He was building Leo up and making him dependent at the same time. Leo was a victim, but as my resolve hardened, I began to see him as something else, a potential asset. I started making small talk with Leo when he would come to the house to work with Miles. I was careful, neutral, just the supportive, friendly wife. I'd bring them coffee and ask innocent, Elena-coached questions. I'd say things like, "It's so fascinating how Miles talks about radical honesty. I've always wondered, Leo, as a student of his, how do you navigate that ethically, when an honest observation could deeply wound someone?" I was planting seeds, not of rebellion, but of critical thought. I was trying to get him to see the gap between the theory and the man. My bond with Elena deepened during these weeks. One evening, after a particularly draining session where I'd played a clip of Miles calling me beautifully broken, Elena was uncharacteristically quiet. She stared out her office window for a long time before she spoke. "You know why I wrote that article, don't you?" she asked, her voice soft. "It's not just because his work is shoddy." She told me about her time in graduate school. Miles was her senior mentor. They were working together, developing a new model for couples therapy based on her foundational research into attachment theory. They were a team. He was charismatic, brilliant, and she, like so many others, had been drawn into his orbit. They were on the cusp of a major breakthrough. Then one day, he was gone. He had taken a new position at another university. 6 months later, his first book came out. It was her research, her model, repackaged with his slick, marketable branding, and her name was nowhere to be seen, save for a single dismissive acknowledgement in the appendix to his research assistant. "He didn't just steal my work, Gillian," she said, her voice tight with a decade of suppressed anger. "He stole my future. He painted me as a disgruntled, hysterical student when I tried to fight it. He used his power and his charm to ruin my academic reputation. I had to start over from scratch." In that moment, our alliance was forged in something stronger than a shared enemy. It was forged in shared experience. We were two women whose lives and careers had been damaged by the same man in the same way. He had underestimated both of us. He had dismissed her as a bitter academic and me as a fragile wife. He had no idea we were now working together. I looked at Elena, the quiet fire in her eyes, and a phrase popped into my head, a thought so clear and sharp it felt like a mission statement. It wasn't about revenge until it was. Now, it was for me, and it was for her, and it was for every person who had ever been silenced by a man like Miles Corbin. The plan was no longer just about my escape. It was about dismantling an empire built on lies, and we had the schematics. The first move had to be silent, a tremor deep in the foundations of his world that he wouldn't be able to trace back to me. Elena was adamant about this. A direct attack would be his territory. He would thrive in a public battle, painting me as the vindictive, unstable wife. Our strategy had to be more surgical. We wouldn't attack the man. We would destabilize his ecosystem. Our first target was his publisher. They were the ones who amplified his voice, who transformed his poison into a best-selling product. Elena, with her academic background, knew exactly how to approach this. She spent a week helping me compile a dossier. But it wasn't the raw, emotional collection of recordings I had been imagining. It was something far more potent. It was a cold, clinical, academic document. We transcribed the most damning audio clips, removing my voice entirely, presenting only his words. We organized them by theme, using his own chapter titles from his books. Building Trust Through Vulnerability, The Honesty Framework, Empathetic Listening. Beneath each of his transcribed quotes, Elena wrote a short professional analysis, identifying the specific psychological manipulation technique being deployed, citing academic literature that highlighted its abusive potential. The final document was terrifying. It read like a manual for coercive control, written by the master himself. But we didn't send the dossier. Not yet. That was our queen on the chessboard, to be played at the right moment. Our first move was a pawn. Elena had a friend, a senior editor at a rival publishing house in New York. She had her friend make a call to Miles' editor, a man named Marcus Thorne. The call was framed as a professional courtesy. The friend said, "Marcus, we're considering acquiring a new psychology author, and we're doing some due diligence on the current market leaders. We're putting together a feature on therapeutic ethics in publishing. We've come across some academic chatter suggesting that some of Dr. Corbin's core theories might have some uncredited origins. I was just wondering what your house's protocol is for verifying the originality of nonfiction work like his." The question was a masterpiece of passive aggression. It didn't accuse, it inquired. It didn't threaten a lawsuit. It invoked due diligence and protocol, words that make publishing lawyers wake up in a cold sweat. It was designed to plant a single corrosive seed of doubt in the one place Miles was most vulnerable. His profitability. An author with a hint of plagiarism or ethical scandal attached to him is a financial liability. The second prong of the attack was aimed at his agent, a slick, fast-talking man named Julian, who saw Miles not as a person, but as a brand. For this I had to step onto the stage myself. Elena and I rehearsed it for days. I was to use one of Miles's most cherished techniques, transparent vulnerability. I scheduled a lunch meeting with Miles and Julian, framing it as my desire to be more involved, to be a better partner in Brand Corbin. Miles was thrilled. He saw it as a sign that his fragile wife was finally re-engaging with his world. At the restaurant, a chic, minimalist place Julian favored, I played my part. I was quiet, supportive, and full of admiration for them both. Then, at the perfect moment, I turned to Julian, my face a mask of loving concern. I said, "Julian, I have to be honest. Sometimes I worry. Miles's work is so powerful, so personal, but it's also so easily misunderstood by those who aren't on his level." My voice trembled just enough. "I worry about his legacy. What if someone with an agenda, a professional rival perhaps, tried to twist his words? What if they took something out of context to make him look bad? I just want to be sure, what protections do we have in our contracts if his public image were ever unfairly compromised?" I saw a flicker of panic in Julian's eyes before he smoothed it over with his usual charm. He saw a worried wife, but he heard the words "compromised public image." For an agent who works on a 15% commission, that's the sound of money burning. I hadn't made a threat. I had expressed a fear. I had used vulnerability as a weapon, just as Miles had taught me. The tremors started almost immediately. Miles came home a few days later, his jaw tight. He was tossing his keys onto the marble console with more force than usual. "Can you believe it?" he said, pacing the living room. "Marcus called from the publishing house, some sort of routine fact-checking, asking about my citations from grad school. From 20 years ago. It's ridiculous." I just looked at him, my face a mask of sympathetic confusion. "That's so strange. Why would they care about that now?" He shook his head, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. "I don't know." And Julian called, wanting to set up a meeting about brand reinforcement strategies. "Something feels off. It's like there's a poison in the water, and I can't find the source." He was becoming paranoid. The abuse at home escalated, but it was different now. It was desperate. He tried his old techniques, but I was inoculated. He would say, "You seem distant. You're retreating into your own head again." And I would reply, with a calm Elena had coached into me, "That's an interesting observation. What specific behavior are you identifying as distant?" I was using his own therapeutic language, his own insistence on specifics, against him. It drove him crazy. It was like trying to punch smoke. He couldn't land a blow. He couldn't get the emotional reaction he needed to feed on. He was a vampire starving for his favorite meal, and I had simply stopped bleeding. The silent takeover was working. He knew he was under attack, but he had no idea the call was coming from inside the house. The metaphorical family that supported Miles's empire, his publisher, his agent, his adoring public, was beginning to fracture. But the final piece of the puzzle, the one that would cause the most personal damage, was Leo. Turning his protégé was the most delicate and dangerous part of the plan. It felt like a family exodus, a son turning against his father. I knew a direct approach with Leo would backfire. His loyalty to Miles was built on a foundation of idol worship. I couldn't just tell him the truth. I had to let him discover it for himself. The opportunity came on a Tuesday afternoon. Miles and Leo were in the home office, working on the proposal for Miles's next book, a project tentatively titled The Trust Protocol. I knew they were in there, so I accidentally left my phone on the credenzo outside the office door with the recorder active. I then went to the kitchen to make them a pot of tea, a perfect portrait of the supportive spouse. I returned 10 minutes later. As I approached the office, I could hear Miles's voice, louder than usual, sharp with irritation. "No, Leo, no," he was saying. "That's not it at all. You're still thinking like an academic. It's too dense, too technical. People don't buy textbooks. They buy feelings. They buy simple, repeatable mantras. Honestly, sometimes it's like I'm teaching a puppy to walk on its hind legs. It's a cute trick, but you're a long way from being able to dance." The cruelty was breathtaking in its casualness. He was using the exact same tone of dismissive condescension he so often used with me. I paused in the hallway, my heart pounding. This was it. I waited a beat, then walked into the office, a bright smile on my face. "Tea is ready," I announced, setting the tray down. I glanced at Leo. His face was pale, his expression shell-shocked. He was trying to hide it, but I could see the wound. I retrieved my phone from the credenza, my hand brushing the screen to stop the recording. Miles, oblivious, took a cup of tea. "Thank you, my love. We're just having a little breakthrough here." Leo is really starting to grasp the essence of the Corbin brand. I just smiled. "I'm so glad. You two make such a wonderful team." Later that evening, after Leo had left, I found the audio file. It was perfect. I cropped the clip of Miles's puppy comment and sent it to a burner email address I had created. The next day I sent an anonymous email to Leo from that address. The subject line was "Something you should hear." The body of the email contained only the audio file, no explanation, no context. Just Miles's own words, in his own voice, dripping with contempt for the young man who worshipped him. Miles, meanwhile, was starting to sense that I was slipping from his grasp. His usual methods weren't working, and the pressure from his professional world was mounting. He tried to switch tactics, moving from psychological warfare to grand romantic gestures. It was his last desperate attempt at counter-manipulation. "Jillian," he said one evening, his voice full of forced enthusiasm, "I've booked us a trip. A week in Maui, just the two of us. No phones, no work. We need to reconnect. We need to get back to us." A year ago I would have wept with gratitude. Now I just felt a profound coldness. I looked at him and said, calmly, "That's a very generous thought, Miles, but I can't get away from the lab right now. It's not a good time." His face fell. The rejection, especially of such a grand gesture, was something he wasn't prepared for. He then tried another classic tactic: isolation. He called my sister Sarah, expressing his deep concern for my mental state. He told her I was withdrawn, paranoid, that I was having trouble distinguishing reality from my anxieties. It was a preemptive strike, designed to discredit me with my own family before I could ever tell them my side of the story. But he was too late. Foreseeing this exact move, I had driven to my sister's house the week before. For the first time in years, I had told her everything. Not the strategic, weaponized version I shared with Elena, but the raw, painful human truth. I had cried. She had held me. She had believed me. So when Miles called her with his feigned concern, Sarah was ready. She listened patiently, and then said, "Miles, I appreciate you calling, but I've spoken with Jillian. She seems more clear-headed than she has in years. Maybe the problem isn't her. Maybe you should take a look in the mirror." The call ended abruptly. Miles was shaken. One of his most reliable weapons, my perceived instability, had been neutralized. The walls of his prison were crumbling, and he was running out of ways to rebuild them. The tipping point came 2 days later. I received a short, formal email from Leo. It was a resignation letter. It said he was leaving his position as Miles's research assistant, effective immediately, to reevaluate his professional and ethical priorities. It was a devastating blow, not just to Miles's workflow, but to his ego. Leo was his hand-picked successor, the living proof of his mentorship. The puppy had not only refused to dance, he had walked off the stage. The first real, public crack in the facade of Dr. Miles Corbin had appeared, and it was about to shatter completely. The final call came from Marcus Thorne, the publisher. It was an emergency meeting, a crisis summit, he'd called it. They had received an anonymous package. Inside was the dossier, the full, devastating clinical breakdown of Miles Corbin's methods, complete with transcribed, time-stamped evidence of psychological abuse, all framed within his own terminology. Marcus had also received a single, anonymous audio file, a clip so damning it couldn't be ignored. The meeting was set for the next day at the publisher's regional office downtown. Miles, his agent Julian, Marcus, and the company's chief legal counsel would be there, and Marcus had insisted. I was to be there as the supportive, concerned wife, to help Miles through this vicious, anonymous attack. The night before the meeting, the house was silent. Miles was a caged animal, pacing, furious, trying to spin a narrative that could save him. He was blaming Elena, calling her a bitter, washed-up academic on a witch hunt. He was trying to convince me, and himself, that this was all a misunderstanding, a professional smear campaign. He had no idea that the architect of his ruin was sleeping on the other side of the bed. I walked into that boardroom, feeling a strange, profound calm. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken fear and legal liability. Miles sat at the head of the table, trying to project an aura of wounded dignity. Julian, his agent, sat beside him, his face ashen. He was already calculating the financial fallout. Marcus and the lawyer sat opposite, their expressions grim. I took my seat slightly behind Miles, the perfect picture of the loyal wife. Marcus began. He spoke about the dossier, the disturbing allegations. He was careful with his words, all legal and couched in conditionals. Then he said, "Miles, we also received this." He pushed a small speaker to the center of the table and pressed a button. My voice, shaking and small, filled the room. "You can't just diagnose me whenever I make a mistake." Then Miles's voice, cold and clinical. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I would never say that to you. You must have imagined it. You've been under so much stress lately, Gillian. It's common for the mind to play tricks, to confabulate memories under duress." The silence that followed was absolute. The word confabulate hung in the air like poison gas. It was the smoking gun. It wasn't just a husband being cruel, it was a licensed therapist using a clinical term to deliberately manipulate his wife's sense of reality. It was a gross ethical violation, captured on tape. Miles finally broke the silence, his voice a desperate rasp. This is an out-of-context moment from a private argument. This is a gross violation of my privacy. My wife, Gillian, was not well at the time. She has struggled for years with anxiety. I was trying to help her to use the tools at my disposal to guide her back to a place of stability. He turned to me, his eyes pleading, commanding. "Tell them, Gillian. Tell them about your struggles. Tell them how I've always supported you." It was his last move, his final play. To sacrifice me to save himself. I felt the eyes of everyone in the room turn to me. The fragile wife, the source of the problem, the unstable patient. I leaned forward, placing my hands on the polished table. I looked not at Miles, but directly at Marcus. My voice, when it came out, was not the voice of the woman on the recording. It was clear, steady, and cold as ice. "Actually," I said, "I believe context is everything." I slid my purse onto the table and pulled out a single, folded piece of paper. It was a bank statement. That recording was made on the evening of May 12th of last year. It was the third time that week that Dr. Corbin had used the Darvo technique to deflect from a conversation about his financial infidelity. Specifically, a series of uninvoiced cash withdrawals from our joint account totaling over $50,000. The stresses I was under was the stress of being lied to. The memories I was supposedly confabulating was the memory of seeing the bank statement with my own eyes. I have the complete, unedited recordings from that entire week, correlated with the financial records, if your legal team would like to review them. The room went so still, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I had not raised my voice. I had not cried. I had presented data. I had a timeline. I had evidence. I had dismantled his narrative not with emotion, but with facts. Julian, the agent, made a small choking sound. He pushed his chair back from the table, as if it were contaminated. Marcus looked at Miles, his face a mask of utter disgust. The lawyer was already quietly making notes on a legal pad. Miles stared at me. The mask of the compassionate guru, the loving husband, the patient savior, it all dissolved in an instant. For the first time, he was seeing me. Not the fragile doll he had created, but the woman who had sat silently, gathering the evidence of his crimes. The look in his eyes was no longer manipulative or condescending. It was pure, unadulterated hatred. He had finally been confronted with a reality he couldn't rewrite. The charade was over. It's been 6 months since that day in the boardroom. I'm speaking to you now from my new apartment. It's smaller than the glass house on the hill, but the silence here is different. It's not the weaponized silence of an abuser. It's the peaceful, healing silence of solitude. The view from my window isn't as panoramic, but it's mine. The fallout for Miles was catastrophic and beautifully swift. The publisher didn't just freeze his contract. They invoked the morality clause to claw back his most recent advance, citing the reputational damage he had caused. They announced an independent ethical review of his entire body of work. Julian dropped him as a client the same day as the meeting. The news, carefully leaked by Elena's contacts, spread through the industry like fire. The story of the great Dr. Corbin, the architect of the modern marriage, being exposed as a manipulative fraud was too juicy to ignore. His empire crumbled. The review of his work, prompted by the publisher, opened the floodgates. Elena, no longer a lone voice in the wilderness, formally submitted her original research, and for the first time, people listened. Other former students and clients came forward with their own stories of his manipulation and ethical breaches. He's now facing multiple lawsuits and a full investigation by the state licensing board. His name is Mud. His books are being pulled from shelves. The man who built a career on defining reality for others has lost all control of his own. I used my share of the divorce settlement, which, thanks to the evidence of financial infidelity, was substantial, to start over. I've opened my own small private practice. I specialize in helping victims of covert emotional and psychological abuse. I help them find their voice, just as Elena helped me find mine. I help them see that they are not crazy, that their reality is valid. And Leo, he came to see me a few weeks after everything went public. He was humbled, apologetic for his own blindness. He asked if he could work for me as an unpaid intern, just to learn what ethical, truly empathetic therapy looks like. He's here now in the other room, compiling research. He's going to be a good therapist one day. A kind one. For years, Miles defined my world. He was the sun, and I was just a planet caught in his orbit, my own light extinguished by his shadow. He used his knowledge not to heal, but to possess. You know, they say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist. But I think the greatest trick a manipulator ever pulls is convincing their victim they're the crazy one, that their feelings are invalid, that their memories are faulty, that their own mind is a traitor. When I started this journey, it wasn't about revenge. I want you to know that. It was about survival. It was about clawing my way out of a psychological prison before it consumed me entirely. But somewhere along the way, listening to the stories of Elena, seeing the potential for future victims in young men like Leo, it became about something more. It became about justice. It wasn't enough to escape. I had to burn the prison down so no one else could ever be trapped there again. Miles gave me the perfect education in his methods. He taught me his playbook, cover to cover. He just never ever imagined I'd have the audacity to use it to write a new ending. An ending where he is a footnote, and I am the author of my own story. If you've ever been in a situation where your reality was questioned, where you were made to feel small or unstable for having your own feelings, I want you to hear me now. You are not alone, and you are not crazy. Your voice matters. Hit that like button if you believe in the power of speaking your truth, and please subscribe for more stories about taking back your power. The comment section is a safe space, so if you feel comfortable, share your own story. Because every voice that refuses to be silenced makes the world a little bit safer for the next one. We are so much stronger together.